So pretty clear there, Kristen Soltis-Anderson, what the president said. It does seem to contradict what Elon Musk said, although now everyone, of course, as you heard Chip Roy earlier on the program, and the tweets from the White House are that, well, actually, we can find this amount of waste, fraud, and abuse.
Yeah, this is not an issue on which I think Republicans are all unified in their heart of hearts. I think politically, they all know there is no winning in touching Social Security. And I really have been thinking a lot lately about 20 years ago. George W. Bush gets reelected, and he gets reelected on a platform of, I'm going to make you safer. And the very first thing he does with all this political capital is says, let's privatize Social Security. Now, in hindsight, it is interesting to wonder what would have happened had we 20 years ago radically changed Social Security. Would we be on a more fiscally healthy path? I will leave that to the policy people, but I do know that it politically did not go very well for George W. Bush back then, and I don't think the politics are any better now.
There's a direct correlation between that policy promise that he came back in with and how drastically they lost in midterm elections. And I think that we're going to begin to see that. The 100 days is one thing, but something we were talking about off air. The telltale sign will be Virginia and New Jersey, which come up quite often, and that will be the next election we have in this cycle. But also, there is a problem when Elon Musk is the leading trumpet, for lack of a better term, when he is the head cheerleader for the Republican Party, and he's out there hawking Teslas on the front lawn of the White House, and he's trying to get Donald Trump to buy a $100,000 vehicle while threatening to take away my mother's Social Security. That is a bit ironic. And not only that, but he gets, when he talks about policy, he's just not smart. I mean, he said that Social Security was a giant magnet for illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants don't get Social Security. In fact, they contribute over $25 billion a year and don't receive any. I mean, he says things like that, and then it gets magnified because he owns X. And I'm like, this dude is just not smart when it comes to these issues.
Well, and yet, right, I think it's actually quite smart for Donald Trump to have him around as a heat shield, right? He's out there saying crazy things, and for once, it's not Donald Trump saying crazy things, right? And he's also a kind of, to mix metaphors, a kind of test balloon, a trial balloon, right? He goes out there and says something about cutting Social Security. If people get up in arms about it, Trump could say, well, that's just Elon. You know, I don't agree with that.
Right. Well, so Elon was pressed, Bill, about this. He was asked about it in this extensive appearance where Donald Trump was lined up with 4 Teslas and a Cybertruck.
Which we keep saying, by the way, continuing to help this commercial.
Well, yeah, yes, it is. It's certainly what Trump was going for. But let's watch what Musk said when he was asked about entitlements and benefits.
Can you guarantee people who are concerned about an interruption to benefits that there will not be?
Yes, we're going to be very careful with any interruption to benefits. In fact, only by tackling the waste and fraud in entitlements like Social Security, Medicare, can we actually preserve those programs for the future. Because with unchecked fraud and waste, we won't be able to afford them.
So, Bill Stepien, I mean, point taken on that, but also the idea that there's going to be interruptions to benefits has been introduced into the system. I mean, that's not something that we ever talked about before.
No, I mean, for a White House fighting a war on like 19 different fronts every day, having to do the cleanup on aisle Elon today is just not what you want to do.
I'm going to steal that phrase, clean up on aisle Elon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't talk about building electric cars or rocket ships for a reason. Like, policy people should talk about policy. The sticks are out there every morning. You go talk to the morning shows. You know, that's not his space. I would stick out, stay away from it.
And the funny part about it is he said, we're going to be extremely careful to make, they haven't been careful in anything they've done. I mean, they've had to go back and rehire people. They fired people that were over our nuclear reserve. I mean, so to think that he has the ability to go in and to Bill's point, I don't even think he knows what he's looking for. I mean, you're talking about somebody like yourself who is, although we disagree on policy, you can be considered a policy wonk. You know this stuff better than most people, right?
You do. Don't sell yourself short, though.
Well, I mean, you know it better than Elon. I mean, that's the bar being in hell. But my point is that you have to have people around you who are doing this. And I'm just afraid, and this is bigger than Democrat or Republican, I'm afraid for those individuals who utilize their Social Security check to pay a mortgage or rent, that Elon Musk is going to create a faux pas, make a mistake, and they're going to be out in the cold, literally.
All right. On that cheerful note here, I want to turn to this because earlier, actually, this is probably less cheerful. We asked sources and friends around town about this sort of inauspicious anniversary of today. 5 years later, how much is COVA-era anger still driving our politics? Here is what some of you had to say. One longtime GOP campaign operative wrote in, quote, It dramatically eroded the trust that the American people have in their government. It will take time and a lot of leaders with integrity to fix it. One longtime pollster chimed in this. Today, it's less about COVID proper, more about the framework under which so many Americans saw COVID, wild conspiracies, and remedies. Kristen Soltis Anderson, I think I was struck by this when we were listening to Donald Trump's address to the nation, that sort of the way the COVID pandemic changed how we relate to not just each other, but to our government and to our institutions is something that we are still feeling every day.
100%. I think the effect that this has had on the average American's belief in their ability to trust theoretically non-political institutions, public health, the CDC, those sorts of things, suddenly went from being apolitical to being quite political. That suddenly, whether you were wearing a mask or 6 feet to, or 2 weeks to stop the spread, 6 feet to keep it, all of that suddenly became a signal of how virtuous you are you listening to the right political voices? And it took things that previously weren't political, made them political. And now we have effects like learning loss from students who are kept out of classrooms way too long. You have the way that so many small businesses had to close their doors. Like, there are still lingering effects that people really feel from this, and I don't think those wounds have fully healed.
Can I just jump in on that? I think that's totally true, but I think what's left unsaid is that Donald Trump, who's president today in part because of it, politicized that because COVID happened on his watch and he didn't want to be hurt by it. And so he made a lot of these things political issues, team sport issues, whether you wear a mask, whether you are vaccinated. I've had GOP operatives tell me the reason he didn't want people to get vaccinated is he didn't want Joe Biden to get the win for a vaccine that was developed on his watch. So he made it a political issue. I think these things aren't the weather. They didn't happen just spontaneously.
Well, I mean, I totally take your point. I think some Republicans would also argue Democrats also really politicized it. But